Many people in Africa have been denied the right to manage their own wildlife resources. For people who depend on farming for income and survival, they cannot allow wildlife, and elephants in particular, to destroy their crops. Many people in the Western world consider the elephant to be a symbol of conservation in Africa, to be saved at any cost. To the people who live with these animals, elephants and other large mammals are a direct threat to their survival. To them, wildlife is a dangerous pest. However, wildlife is a valuable resource which can play an important role in development. Used sustainably, people and animals can prosper.
In 1991, on the 30th of January, elephants came raiding my crops. I tried to chase them away, but it could not work. And the next morning, I came to find out what had happened in my field, and everything was totally destroyed. I thought maybe it would be better if I could get a gun from somewhere so that I could shoot all elephants.
Johan Malalazi is a peasant farmer who lives in Gokwe communal area in Zimbabwe. Many farmers in this area have suffered a similar fate as Johan. Crops, livestock and human life have been lost to wildlife. As well as the animals resident in Gokwe communal area, Gokwe borders onto two protected areas, Chizarera National Park and Chirisa Safari Area, which act as reservoirs of crop-raiding animals. In pre-colonial Africa, people lived with wildlife and were able to benefit from it. This is illustrated by the many Bushman paintings found in caves all over Zimbabwe. Wildlife was a resource which could be used. The conflict between wildlife and people started when colonial legislation outlawed the hunting of wild animals by indigenous people. Not only did this mean that people could not derive any benefit from wildlife, but they also had to bear the cost of living with animals. The problem of wildlife utilization in Zimbabwe goes back to the colonization of the country. Before colonization, people had lived with wildlife and had utilized wildlife as a resource. With colonization, legislation was introduced which made the wildlife fall under the control of the government. And this meant that the people living with the wildlife resource were not allowed to use it. So it was a double-edged sword situation where they weren't allowed to use the resource and they had to suffer the costs of living with that resource. Land was taken away from people to create national parks, and this really caused friction between the people who had been moved and the wildlife resource. In 1978, the first attempts were made to return revenue generated from wildlife to people. The money earned from wildlife went to the government, which then returned it to district councils for their use. There were two problems with this. Firstly, the government was very slow at releasing the money. To this day, the government of Zimbabwe owes the people of Gokwe 1.4 million Zimbabwe dollars. Secondly, and equally important, the money did not go back to the people who were actually living with the wildlife. In the late 1980s, a program called Campfire was implemented to deal with this problem. The aim of Campfire is to return the benefits generated by wildlife directly to the people who are living with it and suffering the costs. Campfire is the communal areas management program for indigenous resources. In this way, it was hoped that the people would begin to regard wildlife as a resource to be utilized sustainably for their benefit. the Campfire program, started in Gokwe when the district was granted appropriate authority in 1990.
But now the coming of Campfire, whereby people had to participate in the effective utilization of wildlife resources, made quite a change, because when we were granted appropriate authority last year, it meant that all the monies that were generated from concession and trophy fees went straight into the council coffers, and then council ensured that these funds were released straight to the people, and in that particular respect, people then began to appreciate the benefits of our Campfire program.
We have got animals which are being accommodated within the wild in Nyungai. Animals like elephants, buffaloes, lions. These animals are capable of paying to the wild a lot of money. That is, if they are being hunted, we get the money from the safari operators.
There are three ways in which wildlife can generate benefits for people: through safari hunting, through the culling of wildlife for meat, and through commercial tourism. With hunting, the district sells a quota of animals to a safari operator. The safari operator then resells the animals to international safari hunters. This form of wildlife utilization can generate immediate and large amounts of money for people in wildlife areas. For example, in 1992, an elephant was worth 50,000 Zimbabwe dollars, a lion $10,000, a leopard $7,000, a zebra $2,000, and an impala $200. Within the national parks, the increase in elephant numbers is putting severe strain on the environment. Elephants are literally destroying their own habitat. This has resulted in an increase in the destruction of crops grown by people in the communal areas which border the national parks.
During the late 1970s, elephant numbers in the Gokwe district within the national parks areas built up dramatically. Not only was there natural increase due to breeding of the population, but the district was being settled and large numbers of elephants migrated into the park area in search of refuge. For example, in the Sengwe Wildlife Research Area, which is 373 kilometers squared in extent, the number of elephants soon reached in excess of 1,000. And a decision was made to cull the elephants because of the effects they were having on vegetation.
These two aerial photographs of the boundary between the national park and Gokwe communal area show the extent of elephant damage to trees in the protected area, which occurred in a 13-year period between 1965 and 1978.
Recently, due to further in-migration and further accelerated resettlement in the Gokwe district, elephant numbers have built up once again to approximately 800. And the decision was made last year to kill approximately 250 elephants as a first step to reducing the elephants towards a desirable limit. That operation produced $214,000 for the Gokwe Council, which was distributed to local inhabitants around the safari area. And the ivory is presently held by national parks to be sold on behalf of the council at a later date, and will hopefully bring in approximately 1 million Zimbabwe dollars.
International tourism is Zimbabwe's third largest earner of much needed foreign exchange. Communal areas like Gokwe have a great tourist potential. As well as wildlife-based tourism, communal areas offer the potential of cultural tourism. Gokwe area is particularly well placed for tourist developments which utilize the neighboring national parks. Under Campfire, wildlife can benefit people living in communal areas, raising income, building schools, and other desperately needed infrastructure. However, the ban on trade in elephant products is threatening this partnership between people and wildlife. It has been calculated that if Gokwe could sell the ivory from the cull, the household benefit would be raised from $35 to $270. In the Nyunga ward, the money earned by wildlife was brought to the community in cash.
It was 1991 when the DA, the council chairman, Mr. Chikun, and other members from the council brought to Nyunga an amount of $31,365 as a ward dividend. And this was the money which was from the wildlife exploitation within Nyunga. And the people there, especially women, they were cheering, clapping their hands in proof of receiving the money from wildlife.
Other wards in Gokwe received their money in a similar way. Currently, the hunting quota in Gokwe is set by the Department of National Parks. But the idea of Campfire is that people should manage the wildlife themselves. This year, for the first time, local, village and ward committees will assist in setting the quota. The quota must be sustainable so that people benefit not just this year, but for many years to come. Campfire, or Wildlife by the People, is a new program which raises new problems. Many people have lost their traditional skills for managing wildlife, while new skills are needed to efficiently utilize the large amounts of money being generated. Each village has a wildlife committee, which, together with the chief and the councillor, are responsible for managing both the wildlife and the money generated. Training is provided by the national parks, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, and MS. Anna-Marie Jensen, a Danish volunteer in Gokwe, is the wildlife coordinator. She uses money from MS to organize the education and training workshops.
So the form that you have got already, use that for the first road.
We're studying these problem animals so that we can finally reduce the conflict between people and animals.
Role plays are frequently used in training sessions. For example, in the training of problem animal reporters.
soon masiku.
Saka mutore zindama zinabyariko chatora time kuti zimene saka details zakwasha kutora time.
So you take what I'm saying, it will take us a long time till we get to a solution.
So do
you mean to say I should just stay and watch elephants coming to my field?
Now I'm
going to measure the area that has been raided. Discounting the area that has been raided with animals.
Right, Mugata 5 acres.
Out of the 5 acres,
you could out 3.5 acres.
I'm concluding that 3.5 acres have been raided.
When the problem animal reporter comes to my house and starts shouting at me,
kana problem animal reporter akawaya kuma kwangu achitanga kundituka.
First thing I do is say, hey, just sit down and cool off.
Apa ndofunga munhu uya anenge achirwa nomunhu akaenda una problem animal report. Saka vanzi kana akauya achipopota sezvaita ane dzungu, chandinomuudza ndinomuudza kuti gara pasi umbotonha.
Okay, now tell me the story quietly.
Chindiudza zvaitika kumunda kwako zvakanaka.
Okay, when you've heard the story, you talk to him and counsel him.
Campfire is an economic and a conservation program. Without the income from wildlife, there is no economic basis for Campfire. With the revenue from wildlife, people are once more learning to live with the wildlife. Without it, people will continue to regard wildlife as a pest, and poaching will continue. The farmer who regards wildlife as an asset will protect it against the poachers.
They're two very different sort of operations. The snaring type man is very low intensity, and by continually patrolling the area and catching a small fraction of these peoples, we can control, if not eliminate it, and the effect on animal populations is relatively small. The organized gangs coming in from Zambia are a completely different setup and are having a dramatic and marked effect on the populations that they're aiming at. There's no doubt that recently they have developed some links with local people and they are assisted by Zimbabweans. Whether Zimbabweans are actually part of the poaching gangs, up to now we don't know, but we're quite sure that they're receiving assistance in the form of food and shelter outside the park from these people. The cost of anti-poaching to catch the commercial poachers is very, very high. We're probably talking something in the order of 1,000 Zimbabwe dollars per square kilometer. So to counter that threat, we need more money and we need more men, not just men, trained men and motivated men. The motivation is important because the poachers who come in are well armed, generally with AK-47s, although other weapons have been recovered, including machine guns and heavy caliber weapons.
Campfire aims to reduce the conflict between wildlife and people, as well as provide benefits. One way of reducing the conflict between people and wildlife is with electric fencing.
These guys are working on the alignment. They are clearing so that we put an electric fence which is going to demarcate the domestic and wildlife communities. And it is a method of trying to avoid conflict between wildlife and domestic life. And also that the animals that are going to be put in the game corridor are going to be a benefit to the people of this area.
The electric fence is maintained by people using some of the money from wildlife. However, if people are not allowed to sell certain animal products, then the economic base of their program is threatened. Without the revenue from wildlife, the conflicts between people and animals will once more grow. If this happens, traditional hunting and poaching will once more become a problem and the wildlife resource will be threatened. Both the people and the wildlife of Gokwe will suffer. In March 1992, the Convention for International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES, extended the ban on trade in elephant products. Other countries want to ban the hunting of elephants altogether. Where animals are a benefit to people, they will accept and protect them. When they are only a threat, they will eventually destroy them.